Hey guys, Scott here. The Houndmaster just randomly dropped on the PTB after I just made a tweet saying, where's the PTB stuff? So that was cool. But I spent about 5 hours playing her straight, and I wanted to give my first impressions for the killer itself. And they are, overall, I would have to summarize it as the base concept is actually really cool. And I think there is potential for this killer to be very successful and strong and good. But on the PTB right now, she is really bad. She is a very, very weak killer. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it's just jank. It's just really buggy PTB. A lot of the time, you will send your dog out with a path and he'll just sit there and do nothing, or he'll ignore the path you took. So there's a lot of things like that where she's just dysfunctional, and it's kind of hard to judge killer strength because of bugs ruining her perception of strength. So I will try to focus on the matches where I didn't have any bugs or anything like that. But I will say she is a very weak killer at the current time. There's a lot of things we can do to make her much better and much more viable, but as it stands right now, she is very underwhelming. So let's go over just my experiences playing her and why she was like that. First up, you have two basic modes with this killer. You have the chase mode and then like the search mode. Your dog can do two different things. And the search mode is incredibly underwhelming. It is really, really bad. The whole thing of search mode is you can tag any spot, within a certain distance, or you can tag a generator. The tagging is really jank too. You have to like move your mouse up and down to find the right exact pixel that it'll snap onto something. That's PTB jank. I'm sure that'll be gone. But when you lock onto something like that, it creates this pathway that you can move towards whatever you just tracked, right? And your dog will go that way. And if you walk in the path that is created, you will move faster. It seems like it's 5% haste, 5, 7, 10% maybe. It seems more like it's 5% haste. It's borderline, it's a very, very small amount of haste. And the thing is, you have to follow the exact direct path or it immediately drops off. There's no lingering haste. There's nothing. So you have to take the exact path or you don't benefit from the haste at all. And I think that's the first misstep there. So there's not really any reason to use the search mode ever at all in any read. Like there's just no reason to use it except maybe at the start of the game and you don't know where people are and you just want to send your dog out to get some good information. That's about it. As long as you know where people roughly are, it's such a downside to use if you send your dog across the map, because if you do find someone during that time, you have no power for the entire time that your dog is, sniffing in a corner somewhere. So your dog goes there, he patrols for a second, and then he sniffs the ground for a few seconds, then he has to run back to you, and then your cooldown it starts recovering again. Basically, what it ended up being was every time I sent a search out, I would just find a survivor during that time, and I could just not do anything the entire time until the dog came back, and then my cooldown reset. And that is a huge problem, in my opinion. So search mode needs to have a lot of changes for it to be better. One, the haste needs to be like literally 4 times as much. This is not really a power you can abuse for chase. So you don't have to worry about people getting 40% haste or whatever while they're chasing you and hitting you because of that. You have a very skinny line to follow wherever you're going, and it has to be a target point that you put. It's not like I could just drop a search mode here and then benefit from it like that and then get it down that way. It's solely a mobility thing, and because it's solely a mobility thing, I think there's no real balancing downside to just simply making you go really fast inside of it, because she has no map control power or anything like that whatsoever. She's really, really bad at controlling the map. So the search mode needs to be much faster with the haste if you follow the exact route. Additionally, it needs to have some form of cooldown reduction to your regular power. It is so bad that you send the dog out and then you're just waiting and waiting and waiting before you can actually use the projectile form of the dog. So it needs to be a way to where you can cancel it immediately and summon them back to you like Victor or something like that, or the dog will just teleport back immediately after searching instead of having to run and path back to you. I don't know, something. There needs to be something done there to make that form just not a complete waste of time, other than maybe the very first chase that you take at, the start of the game, just to get information on where people are going to be. So I think that's the first major issue. Search form is incredibly underwhelming. Next is the actual chase form. This is where you essentially launch the dog. It's sort of like a slower Huntress hatchet that obeys pathing. That's the best way I can put it. It's not really like anything, but if I had to compare it to something to kind of understand it, you can see the orange track of where he goes there, and it'll kind of contour around curves and stuff like that, so it's not an exact straight line thing. There's a little bit of curving that can go on with it. It's kind of jank to control that curving, but there's a little bit of stuff that you can do there. Now, when you get to the end of the path, you have like a half a second to a second window. You have this tiny little window to right click and redirect the path. So you can essentially do another charge from wherever the dog currently is. The problem is that is also really underwhelming for a number of reasons. One, while you're doing all this, you're immobile. So if the survivor is just running away from you, if you miss, you're fucked. You just lost the chase. You haven't been moving this entire time. And that can be really, really detrimental. It's almost like a dredge remnant, except you can't move when you're starting it. And that's really, really rough. So the actual projectile obeys pathing and stuff like that, which means it can't go through walls like, a pinhead's grab or anything like that. So you have to have a straight line, basically. Anywhere you could hit like a series of Wesker dashes, like a line and then a line, is where you can hit the dog. But the problem is, whereas Wesker, after he hits his first dash, can wait to see where the juke is going to happen, you can't do that as a dog. It doesn't really have the ability to zone people because it expires in like half a second. If you have a path that's really long, then you can do it, but you've probably gone so far past where the guy is that the second charge attack the distance is going to be too long for you to ever bother hitting him. Additionally, on top of that, there is a very clear tell for the survivors when you have begun your redirection attack, and your eyes glow white, or they glow yellow, and there's also a very specific sound as well. So you know exactly when the killer has transitioned to controlling the dog, and you have to remember they only have about a half a second to a second window to do it. So you know they're going to shoot immediately, which means as soon as you see the eyes of the dog glow, you immediately juke. And the killer, basically, the only way I was able to reliably hit people with the redirect attack is by guessing which way that they were going to juke and just intentionally missing in that direction. About half the time I would guess right, and that's cool, but half the time I would guess wrong and go in the complete opposite direction. But because there's such an obvious tell when the killer is controlling the dog, there's just it's just way too easy to deal with. So that is also pretty underwhelming. Now, if you do manage to hit with the dog, which is very difficult to do, it does almost always guarantee you a hit. However, there are times where the dragging also just seems to go in random directions. One time I got a hit with the dog and we were far away from the pallet, and the dog dragged the survivor at Mach 10 through the pallet so the survivor could stun the dog. It was the most crazy shit I've ever seen. But the dog actually sucked the survivor to the pallet away from me. So I don't know the physics or logic with how this dragging works, but it seems to be really random, and sometimes it'll fuck you over completely. I actually had someone next to me, and then the dog randomly dragged them back so fast that it was like sprint burst speed, and the attack actually locked on and whiffed, as if I was swinging at a sprint burst. So that was incredibly frustrating as well. So even when I hit the power, it still had no reward, and in fact, it was detrimental. But the problem is you can also just sit behind shit and wait here because they know I can't do anything about that. I'm not gaining distance on them, so they can just simply sit there and wait, and they're in no danger whatsoever. There's no threat if you have a tiny rock or anything away. As soon as the redirect attack begins, just don't do anything. Just sit there. You're completely safe. So that is another huge issue with that as well. And those are the two main powers of the killer. So that's really all she's got going for her. There's not much else. Now, there's also the Hound Sense thing, which is a passive part of the search mode. So if you go near a survivor, you have basically, the longer the search distance, you have an increasing AoE around the dog, where you will have Killer Instinct apply on nearby survivors. So it gives you some information that way. Now, for some reason, if you hit a survivor that was sensed by that, they get Deep Wound, which I feel like is not thematic at all. It doesn't make any sense, and it's barely even a reward. It doesn't fit anything, and I don't even care about Deep Wound because I'm likely going to be chasing that person anyway, whether they're injured or in deep wound. I'm still chasing them. It's the same basic effect. So you would think with the kind of killer that this is, it would be more like a tracking thing, that if you hit a survivor that was, tagged by the Hound Sense ability, maybe they would have aura reading on them or periodic Killer Instinct on them for 20 seconds, like a tracker, because that's what the search mode is about. It's about tracking. So you think it would do that and not deep wound for whatever reason. So that also doesn't really make any thematic sense, and gameplay-wise, it doesn't really offer you much of an advantage in any way like that. The dog is also, like I said, extremely buggy and jank. Whenever it tries to vault a pallet or window, it runs to the pallet, waits, vaults, waits, then takes the path. During that whole time, the survivor has gotten around a corner, then you're just not going to hit. So there's this awkward pause on everything that the dog does that feels really, really bad. And that can make doing correct pathing even not accurate, or it just ends up not working at all. because by the time the pausing actually is finished, they've gotten around a corner. And it's just, yeah, that's really, really frustrating as well. So a lot of high risk maneuvers where you're standing still as the survivors are gaining distance and you're trying to control your dog with very little reward. Even if you do get a hit, it's not always even guaranteed a hit. That's not even accounting for the fact if the survivors have endurance, it expires in like half a second. So if someone's got off the record and you try to hit them with the dog, essentially just nothing happens. They move backwards for 1 second, and that also doesn't remove their endurance, so they still have the endurance for the next attempt if you're doing that. Her add-ons don't really have any insanely broken things. Like, I would legit argue that Trapper is stronger than this killer now, because at least Trapper's got, like, Iridescent Stone, Honing Stone, Bloody Coil. He's got really strong add-ons. This killer doesn't really have anything like that to put her in, like, hey, Myers is okay because Tombstone Piece exists. She doesn't have anything to set her above that. So, between the fact that the killer doesn't work super well on the PTB, and when she does work, her power is overall very underwhelming. I would say she is currently one of the weakest killers in the game on the PTB. Again, there's so much time for change, so this is not a doomsayer thing or anything like that. I'm just saying my first experiences with her were not very good because she is very, very weak. As soon as you get survivors that realize they just need to be patient when you do the redirect, it's just all form of mind game kind of goes away. You can't really use it for zoning at all because if you shoot the dog out, you have about a half a second to a second to actually make the attack go off, so it just doesn't work. Nothing about her really works to any effective way. I don't think I've ever lost with a killer as much on the PTB as I have with this killer. I was just struggling to win any games versus my viewers. So it was really, really rough. I'm not seeing any, like, forbidden tech. I'm sure there's some stuff people will learn over time, like getting dogs to curve around things in a certain way that I'm not realizing that. I fully understand. I'm certainly not a master with the killer, and she does have a lot to learn. I just want it so when we do learn these amazing things, there's actually a tangible and good reward for them. So those are the main takeaways from it. Search mode needs to be incredibly buffed. It's insanely underwhelming, and then her actual chase power, too, is underwhelming as well. So in the next video, I'll go over all the new perks, the new map, and all the things involving this patch that do not involve this killer herself. But overall, I think she has great potential. The design space is awesome. Her Teridius music is insanely good. I absolutely love it. You can pet the dog. That's obviously a very good upside. She just needs a lot of work done, and I'm not sure if they're going to get that done in the next 3 weeks, making her actually good. So I think on release, we're going to have probably a pretty weak killer. Hopefully that won't be the case, but those are my initial thoughts. More gameplay coming tomorrow, and that's about it for me. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.